the moment, and it's very good to see so many of you here to hear about Mark Leonard's piece of work. I've been in touch with Mark for many years, and very much encouraged by his thought leadership in just trying to push this space forward and really starting to really articulate perhaps an adjusted way of thinking that perhaps is more social, more human, more immersive, and more interconnected in the way that this particular product that has been developed by him and Viamba and Bamba have actually approved the curriculum as well. As to guess what it means. So he's going to be sharing that with us today in the form of a workshop where there will be an opportunity to get involved and be immersed in some of the material that he does present. But Mark is a sustainability professional who applies social mindfulness as systemic change in organisations. He played a key role in establishing the Oxford Mindfulness Centre through 2008 to 2013, and has been actively teaching corporates. And it was when he was teaching CVS vets, in fact, it was starting to dawn upon him the strength and just relevance of seeing this as a social learning experience, social teaching experience, where we started to learn from his material and, of course, the shared stories of individuals that come about through the experience of social learning, and just how powerful that has been. And he went on to develop the mindfulness-based organizational educational piece that when he first introduced it to me, I said that this is just what we need. This is really a step shift in our thinking to learn together. And certainly from my own work, it's that immersive learning where we start to understand ourselves in this interconnectivity in a much better way. I would add that for those of you joining that are not Mindful Workplace Community members, and of course MWC as we call it sits under the umbrella of Bamba, there is a special offer for joining the MWC that's going to be shared in the chat by Sally, where there's going to be a £15 discount to the annual fee for those that want to join. Please be encouraged to join it. And of course, those that want to find out more about Bamba, bamba.org.uk, you will find a stunning new website with a huge amount of resources and some background about just what our drive is and why it's important. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to Mark to run this workshop. And we're very grateful, Mark, for you spending time to do this, and of course for all of you to be joining today. So very much look forward to this session, Mark. So over to you.
Hello, thank you very much, Mark. Yeah, it's looking back, it's quite a story, isn't it? And how we've had our little conversations over the years, wondering about what we were doing and how things are shaping up and stuff. And it's amazing looking back how things have kind of developed over time. I'm just going to share the screen, and we're going to go through a presentation that's going to try and get across the key ideas that I'm working with to underpin the sort of theory of mindfulness-based organizational education. And what I'm talking about, if you like, is the idea of social mindfulness and mindfulness-based organizational education being a form of teaching that has been tried and tested. And within a kind of, so there's a sort of explanation aspect of that, and then a sort of workshop aspect of that where we'll go into breakout rooms and do some sort of workshop type, more of an experiential process of kind of seeing how this works. I've taught a couple of programs online, which have, you know, one of them was very successful in the way it was managed and one wasn't. I don't know if you've had experience teaching online. Sometimes it's kind of quite hard to organize, and when you do organize them, they go very well. So let's hope that we're all we're all going, this is all going to work today. So here we go. I'll share the screen. So the title, mindfulness, a shift from stress-based reduction to organizational change. I wanted to start with this kind of quote here because it's from Tom Oliver, Professor of Applied Ecology at University of Reading, from his book that came out 3 years ago, The Self-Delusion. And he's looking at sustainability from a way in which we understand our sense of selves. And this is very much where I'm coming from. You know, resources, you know, we've evolved in ways to identify with a group of people that identify with a set of resources, and we manage those resources within that community and that identity group. And we live in a global world, in a global environment, a global, you know, a global biosphere. We've got to start to understand the way we relate to each other differently and our sense of self differently. So and it's upon this that this understanding of sense of self, how we relate to each other, that Tom Oliver argues is going to be what makes it possible for us to, you know, adapt to the challenges we face in the 21st century. And as a sustainability practitioner, that's how I'm coming to this whole field, looking for a way to address the problems that we face, primarily from my background in terms of climate change 20 years ago or something, coming to the conclusion that we weren't getting there fast enough, and that I saw a way of actually applying ideas, thinking and practice from Buddhist thinking to make them more accessible widely in society, to create some kind of systemic change, believing that mental well-being, or, you know, rising rates of mental health problems, overconsumption, and were deeply interconnected with the way we organized ourselves. So we need to start thinking about how do we organize ourselves to create the changes that can then result in improved mental well-being and sustainability. So we're just going to arrive and connect, and very much part of this approach is always building those interactions. So that's part of this little workshop here, is to make sure we do that. So Sally, could you send everyone into workshops with 2 or 3 people, and would you just ask yourselves these questions? What do you hope to gain from this workshop? And then share your thoughts with others in breakout groups, and then we'll return to the plenary session and maybe just share a few thoughts if anyone has any, or we'll just move on. But it's always nice to put things into words. It means more to us when we discipline ourselves to put things into words, and when somebody else hears us. And those are profoundly important principles that enable us to be human beings that connect. And interestingly, there are profoundly important functions that take place within mindfulness programs, but I don't think they've been exploited to the degree they could be exploited to benefit people in the process of mindfulness, teaching mindfulness programs, and how then that takes people into experience in the workplace, building those conversations, developing language to talk about how they feel and think and feel, and listening to each other. So we're practicing that by checking in at the start of this workshop. Thank you, Sally.
Just waiting for the last few people to join the room.
Yeah. Yeah, great, great, wonderful.
That's everybody.
Thank you. So have you put them in rooms of 2 to 3?
Yeah, they're all in rooms of 3. We've got
Yeah.
more than expected. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
brilliant. So I'd suggest
2 rooms of 2.
Suggest you give them a warning of 1 minute after 3 minutes.
Okay.
So they get a total of 4 minutes.
Okay.
Brilliant.
No problem.
And the other thing is, are you going to edit out the spaces of between the plenaries, between the what's it now, breakout groups? So welcome back, everybody. I guess I just if there anyone that has got any questions at this stage, please fire away. Otherwise, we'll just carry on with the presentation. And I guess actually the easiest thing to do would be to just pop questions in the chat. And maybe, Sally, you could also just keep an eye open for questions in the chat if they come up. That'd be brilliant. Okay. So why we need to adapt. You know, our emotions have evolved to enable us to survive as the most sophisticated social animals in nature. But what were these conditions? You know, it's been, if we go back to, you know, the origins of hominids, when we separated from, you know, the great apes, and even great ape society, the way it's evolved over millions of years. You know, we separated from chimpanzee lines, chimpanzee and bonobo lines between 4 and 8 million years ago. So our culture and our bodies and our language and our traditions have all evolved over millions of years. And as humans, we've been around for about, you know, 200,000 years or so. And and the modern culture, the modern capacities of humans sort of changed about 70,000 years ago. But so it's something that we experienced through a very slow process. We were very familiar with each other in groups. We had lifelong relationships with people. And so there were an awful lot of our understanding of each other was just intuitive. You know, we survived as a group. We all had to be part of that group, and antisocial behaviors would have been, you know, selected out because we all had to survive as a group, together, supporting each other. We had to live in the natural world. Everything that we lived, everything that we experienced was part of, you know, a natural, biological, ecological lifestyle, and we were part of that. And that's how we were evolved psychosocially. And it's that kind of experience that satisfied our psychosocial needs, our emotional needs, and an integrated sense of meaning of who we were, how we related to each other, how we related to our environment. And this was all about survival from day to day, from year to year, from as the group lived from, you know, one generation to the next. But life today fails to satisfy our social and emotional needs because these social conditions have changed. I mean, there's been a rapid technological development. I don't need to say anything about that. But what I think is really interesting here is to think about is how this has affected the structure of society and how we have coped with this. You know, social mobility, transient relationships, diversity, not to mention the number of people we encounter in our lives, and social inequality. How do we relate to different experiences of relationships with different empowerment or power in that society, and how does that affect us? It's given, it's a social given that we have an individual responsibility to improve ourselves. It's up to us. We don't conceive of everything being about how the group survives and works together. And yet this is how organizations have to work. The reality is that we are working as groups of people together to achieve collective goals. And everybody's needs within the group, within the organization, within the team is satisfied by the overall achievements of that group. We all think we've got individual rights, and a part of that right is even freedom from biological constraints. People are starting to talk about living, let's talk about, I can't remember what it is, but people thinking, scientists talking about being the first people alive that are going to live past 150. And we think that every time that we get some kind of physical problem, we can go and get it some kind of maintenance to sort it out, like take it for servicing like a car. And what's the outcomes of this social experience? Chronic stress, a sense of powerlessness, even though we think that we've got all of the choice in the world, and a systemic crisis. So what do we do about that? And I've always believed that there is something, as I mentioned to start with, that I could find in Buddhist thinking that could be brought into modern society to change, to help us adapt to these conditions. We can't change them, but we might be able to find ways of adapting to them. So our sense of self and experience of stress has changed, and it's imaginary threats that produce the kind of stress-related problems that we have. They're not being dealt with in a way that we would have dealt with them in our ancient traditional societies. And if we just have just look down at the table at the bottom here, there's some interesting comparisons about the kinds of threats that we experienced as in our evolution as hunter-gatherers and in modern society. The kind of the nature of those threats, the frequency, how often they occurred, how predictable they were, and the normal state of experience we evolved to experience in psychological safety, where we felt that our place within the group was pretty much guaranteed, so long as we acted in ways that supported each other within that group. But today it's a sense of self-worth, it's a sense of identity that is ultimately the threat, that we're frightened of losing a sense of social status and wishing to improve ourselves. For sure, increasingly the problem, people are facing real need in terms of paying the bills, but by and large the threat in our society has evolved out of how do we look, more than are we going to get, do we have food and shelter for the next day? And the sense of self, we think of ourselves as individuals, whereas as I'll explain a little bit further, there's really good evidence to believe that the idea of the sense of self is something that extends to the group when we feel safe within that group, and then we work together with that group. As a threat to any individual in the group, we all come together and defend the whole group. And I'll flash that up. This is probably nearly 7 or 8 years old now, these statistics. Nobody needs to be reminded of these, but when you think about it, 1 in 4, 25%, that's shocking. And it's not getting better. And I might say, we've had the amazing work on the development of mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, first papers published more than 20 years ago, and an explosion of studies, but this rate doesn't get any better. Treating the symptoms is not solving the problem. So as I mentioned, I come from a sort of sustainability background, and we need to change the way we understand systems from mechanical processes to complex systems, to understand how to manage them and to manage our own minds, our own health, our own well-being. And I like to kind of share this kind of very simplistic biological model that comes from fisheries management, which shows you, points out how we've got to manage the amount of activity we do to not over exploit a resource and make it collapse. And interestingly, it's a very simplistic model of a fishery. It has to be but all models are simple, that are useful, that get ideas across. And what's really interesting here is that actually the maximum productivity, if we look at the cost, if we say that effort is proportional to cost, the maximum productivity, the maximum benefit we can get out of that resource is by under exploiting it from the maximum yield. And the trouble with biological systems is 1 year the yield is high, and the 1 year that nothing's 100% predictable. And the other thing is we naturally think we can squeeze more out of the system, and actually what we're doing is we're depleting the system. And then in a bioeconomic model, more complex bioeconomic model, what happens is the resource becomes more and more scarce, and the value goes up, and we just squeeze more because the value goes up, and we push it to this point of collapse. And we have to have ways of stopping this process when we have the technology to over exploit the system. And the biological system, the ecosystem, has got remarkable similarities to the human system. This is a management model with a very similar curve. And here, you can see that resilience is in that. I mean, I'm placing these things in very similar places. I'm adapting these models to make the arguments that I want to make. Resilience comes before full exploitation. And then we get to that point when we're pushing and squeezing and we're striving, and we're in dangerous ground then, because then things can collapse. Burnout is what happens. I mean, I'm sure many of you understand the psychology of how that happens probably better than I do. I'm just presenting a model of how this happens, that is about how we should need to understand biological systems rather than apply mechanistic systems to everything. And really we need to use these individual, relational and cultural strategies to make good decisions, maintain resilience and prevent this burnout. So, if you like, standard approaches to mindfulness are all about the individual, but individuals don't have a lot of power in themselves. We've got to build social systems that are able to enact these constraints on the way that we exploit the human mind, the human biology, as well as the natural environment. So what can we do? Okay, so just a quick story of the development of mindfulness-based programs. You're very familiar with John Kabat-Zinn's mindfulness-based stress reduction. I want to make a clear point, though. I think that it's the cognitive therapists that were looking for a novel approach to deal with what were growing rates of depression, recurrent depression in society, and they got the first funding to do this piece of research and develop mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. And they were looking for a program that was repeatable, a secular program that could teach some kind of meditation that would work within the cognitive model. And they combined mindfulness. They chose mindfulness-based stress reduction because it fitted their needs. Now, had they chosen something else, we wouldn't be talking about mindfulness today. We'd be talking, it was also a group therapy, so it worked within a cost-effective way. So in my view, And if you look at the statistics in terms of the number of papers published, it's mindfulness-based cognitive therapy that really made this sea change in awareness of mindfulness. And because it made it scientific, it made it evidence-based. Oh, sorry. Now, then so again, that was a group psychotherapy. And then Mark Williams went ahead and published a self-help book, The Mindful Way Through Depression. Now, if you think about it, this wasn't evidence-based at all. But it was built on the belief that the active ingredient was meditation, defined by the structure of the MBSR program, that it was 8 weeks of 40 odd minutes meditation every day, or half an hour meditation every day. And it was a self-help version. So that you lost all of the psychosocial elements of the MBCT program, published as a self-help book. It changed the way the dose of meditation was delivered. You know, it was a bestseller, and it explained what was going on rather than people just being told what to do. Now, then Danny Penman came along and said to Mark Williams, I want to make this more accessible, and it's got to be shorter. They've got to be shorter meditations. It's got to be clearer. The structure's got to be much clearer as a self-help book. So he kind of twisted Mark Williams' arms, and they collaborated to write this book, which became a huge bestseller and is still probably the best self-help book in mindfulness out there. And that was a big risk for Mark Williams, because it wasn't, you know, the idea that reduced dose could be effective was not evidence-based, and he has to protect his whole status as a clinical psychologist on the basis that he's only going to start talking about what is evidence-based. Fortunately, he got away with it, and it again made a huge effect in terms of making mindfulness accessible to a wider population, wider public, and triggered an explosion of publications of self-help books on mindfulness. And it was incidentally around 2011 when this was published that Headspace hit the marketplace. Anyway, I used the Frantic World book as the model to start teaching this program for CVS Vets, which is the largest veterinary provider of veterinary services in the UK, and probably in Europe, or was then in Europe too. And I wrote about my experiences in Margaret Chapman's book, Mindfulness in the Workplace. She was trying to an early attempt at trying to sort of think about what is going on here in organizations. How do we adapt adapt mindfulness to a workplace effectively? And so my thoughts on my experience in teaching the Frantic World course. I taught about 30 of those courses, and what was interesting also was that, you know, there were talks about changing the whole culture of the veterinary profession to recognize stress as a result of those courses that we taught. So there's a cultural thing going on there. Anyway, I used my experience teaching the Frantic World course, as Mark mentioned earlier, beginning to realize that the social process, you know, I felt the social process, looking at the amount of meditation practice that people were actually doing, it was the social workshop process, the interactions, the talking to each other, and the theory that I felt was having more effect than the actual meditations, even though we were using much shorter meditations. From just intuitively looking at the amount of interaction and or the kind of things that were going on, the kind of stories that people telling each other. So it was much more of a social cognitive. The benefits were much more social cognitive than they were, if you like, meditation derived. I suspected that. Anyway, I got the chance to develop a new program and run that for NHS hospital staff in 2016. And managed to organize a trial. So we ran a waitlist control trial and had really nice results. I'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit. But again, it changed the framing, it changed the explicit context, because now it's recognizing that stress is a normal reaction. We're not trying to solve people's stress. We're recognizing, the first thing is recognizing that people's stress is a normal reaction. And that in itself is a huge release of stress. It's like, I'm not the only person that has this problem. Another aspect of this that was built on the principles of this program is mindfulness of relatedness. And that's the first thing that is that we develop our relatedness with. I'm finding this difficult too. That's the start of relatedness that builds, and sharing stories and opening up and telling each other what's going on with it for each other. The principle being that when we start doing that, we can start solving problems together. So that's the explicit intention, to bring about change. And it then exploits this idea of group mindfulness. What's going on when everybody is starting to listen to each other, everybody is feeling a little bit more safe. So, there's an atmosphere of psychological safety. There's people are more willing to express themselves. There's less of a fear of getting, less risk aversion, etc. Okay, so incidentally, the cover of the book is Descartes, and he's famous for the idea of I think therefore I am, and separating the mind from the body. And the reason why it's the thought bubble is I relate therefore I am, is to sort of overturn Descartes' I think therefore I am. And the cover is just hundreds of pictures of different people's faces. So it's like I'm just a story that's created out of all of these experiences of other people. So it's not a therapy, it's not self-help, and that's another thing. It's explanations are extensive. There is no need, and I really do believe this, there is no need for some kind of mystical thing that we think of, that we call something called awareness. Okay, it's turned into a mystical trope, this magical thing that we call awareness. When you realize that when you actually recognize that it's an artificial division between the idea of what awareness is and the body, it ceases to be a mystical thing, but it becomes now something that is much more explainable, comprehensible, and manageable. And in the end, our experience is something that it doesn't matter what that is. It's something we can't put into words, but there's an awful lot of stuff that we can put into words that describes our experience. It's just understanding the difference, which is probably very well described in the distinction that Ian McGilchrist makes between the attention systems of the right hemisphere of the brain and the attention systems of the left hemisphere of the brain. We can be more disciplined about how the attention systems of the left hemisphere of the brain work and relate to the right, the attention systems of the right hemisphere. I'm not going to talk anymore about Ian McGilchrist. I'm sure many of you have come across him, and if not, just go into YouTube and have a little bit of a Ian McGilchrist festival. Is wonderful stuff. Anyway, MBOE develops social mindfulness for teams in a series of workshops. So these are kind of what it does do. Why MBOE is a powerful intervention. I'm sorry, that editing needs to edit that title, because it removes obstacles to the flow of information between individuals in the team. And that's all about creating psychological safety through the way these two functions of emotional regulation of individuals, which is what standard mindfulness is all about, interact with interpersonal emotional regulation to create an environment of psychological safety. And this then has the benefits in creating an inclusive well-being culture and improved team performance. And there's some 2 or 3 papers that actually, some really good studies that are demonstrating this really is taking place. One of them, which I haven't referenced here, which I should do, is we're done with 60 odd teams in pharmaceutical teams, and by and large socially homogeneous teams outperform socially diverse teams. But when there is a high level of psychological safety, socially diverse teams outperform homogeneous teams. Not to mention the sort of big Google study that across the board identified psychological safety as the key factor in team performance. So I'm saying, but there's very little out there which actually says, how do you go about creating psychological safety? And the fundamentals that I'm arguing here are in the way we combine the impact, the social impact of the way we communicate in ways that produce psychological safety with self-regulation. So self-regulation and co-regulation, or interpersonal regulation, create groups where psychological safety becomes a cultural norm that then changes the behavior and the effectiveness of those teams. So MBOE is a social mindfulness program. I mentioned that there was this kind of idea that I'm talking about, which is the theory of social mindfulness, and MBOE is a program of itself. So yeah, there are these three elements which are involved with it. I've mentioned relatedness, and I think that's where it starts, is where we build the capacities for, you know, standard cognitive mindfulness, if you like, and then we start to relate that to look at, to apply them to our relationships, how we see each other and how we see ourselves constructing a sense of self in relationship to each other. And then it's when we break down those sense of differences between self and other that we start to build capacities for self-acceptance, for empathy, for kindness, because we see ourselves as being connected. We lose our sense of separate self. And this then becomes an insight where we can, you know, recognize how different emotions change our sense of self, and how this creates different narratives in our experience and different descriptions of self and other, and how this then affects the way we work in a group, the kind of cognitive biases that become part of the group behavior, the group think, that stop us adapting and mean that there is, you know, all kinds of implicit bias taking place that means that we judge others that don't quite look like ourselves for one reason or another, or don't quite sound like ourselves, or don't quite talk the same technical language that we do, as people that don't really have as much validity as we do in our group, with our language, the way we look and the way we sound and what we talk about and what we think is important. So I think that the key here is becoming consciously aware of the fact that we create a sense of self, whereas in our evolution we didn't need to feel conscious of that. That was something that was an automatic behavior that enabled us to hold together in groups. But now, in order to address our tendency to define the difference between self and other, which almost always comes out of a sense of threat, we're going to have to become conscious of the way we create a sense of self, and realize that this sense of self is quite an ephemeral thing. It's only there when we start thinking about it. When it's not there, when we're not thinking about it, we're doing something else, we're happy doing what we're doing, it's not there. But because it's there when we think about it, we think it's always there. And that has been, that we're being told, or we've created a society based on an economic approach of self-interest, based on that pattern of thinking about ourselves. So what are the key elements? I've mentioned this before. The key elements are about of the actual approach, of how we listen to each other and how we describe experience, and listen to each other describing our experience, to begin to understand, to build that sense of relatedness and build that insight, which then produces an adaptive response to change in social groups that are diverse with psychological safety. I won't bore you with this, but it's just saying the same thing over again, really. You know, what we're trying to learn in the MBOE program. I mean, I think specifically it's important to mention that, again, it's the skill to listen while attending to feelings, with a conscious, empathetic connection, an open connection, rather than continually trying to problem solve or judge or make assessments or solve what that other person's problem, or give them advice to help them solve their problem. We've got to learn to do that before we start solving the problem, because people need to feel that they are accepted for who they are in their experience as it is before change takes place. And that's a fundamental principle of dealing with people, dealing with psychotherapy, is that principle. And it's in many ways, that's the principle behind what became the idea of developing mindfulness as a therapy. It's enabling people to build that awareness, but awareness itself in us normally happens, openness and awareness as a human being happens in relationship to others that accept us for who we are, and we feel safe, and there's nothing that we have to achieve in order to not be rejected, because rejection is the thing that we fear above all in our evolution. So these it's just focusing on the things that you actually build into a standard mindfulness program, but saying that these are learning objectives as much as the mindfulness meditation itself, and that the mindfulness meditation is designed to support those other aspects of learning, rather than it all being about how do we mindfulness meditate. So it's just turning it on its head, really. And okay, benefits: a sense of community, purpose and belonging, an inclusive well-being culture, resilient culture, and an adaptive approach to collaborating, which releases the collective intelligence of the team, group or organization. And I appreciate that a lot of this is just about saying the same things that many of you are well aware of, but it's telling a story to hang that all together, so that it changes the perception, it changes the context of how you all understand mindfulness as an individual. You may not, or you may have, got a lot of experience in how this works in organizations or in relationships, or even in a sangha, for example, or a community, for example. But I'm just saying that we really need to get smart about telling a different story to take the next step in making in realizing the potential benefits that mindfulness, or I would say social mindfulness, can have in society. So just the shape of the program, it's the one delivered for NHS staff was 6 one-hour classes over 6 weeks, 10-minute guided mindfulness meditation, supportive reading and activities between the class. A trial is just being run in Morocco at the moment. Well, actually should have started, but I'm not sure if it's been delayed. Quite often things get delayed in Morocco, but we're going to try 3 times 2-hour classes in the Casablanca Medical School with a colleague I'm working there. So that's the rough shape of it. I'm also think that it's worth giving it a try as a one-day workshop with follow-up check-ins, because it's these check-ins that become the social ritual that is enabling people to connect with each other and listen with each other, facilitated check-ins. So I'd like to try that as a model as well. So just a quick thing about the evidence, the paper. You're of course welcome to go and have a look at it, but significantly, it had benefits in terms of the normal stress self-report scores and mindfulness scores, significant improvements in both of those before and after, and these were maintained on a 4-week follow-up. There was a waitlist control trial, so of its kind it was a pretty good study. But interestingly, the researchers also used a measure called basic psychological needs at work scale, which comes from self-determination theory, which, if you're interested in organizational psychology, positive psychology, workplace psychology, I'd suggest you read up about, but it's a really important model for what makes people engaged and productive in the workplace. And there are, importantly, there are these three elements of autonomy, competence, and relatedness. We don't like to be micromanaged. We like to feel competent that we can do what we can do. We like to feel free to do things in the way that we like to do them. We like to feel that we've achieved something. And we need to feel connected to the people around us. We need to feel that we are part of the group. Okay, so human culture is a complex system that changes when a tipping point is reached. This is quite a nice little study that I'm referencing here. A tipping point is reached when a critical mass of 25% is committed to change in a group. And this study is done trying to work out how many people it is needed in a group, or the percentage of people are needed in a group that can impact the way sexist language is used, for people to step in and say, I'm sorry, that's inappropriate the way you're speaking like that, rather than there just being 25% of, or everybody becoming individually enlightened that they should no longer use language that would make women feel uncomfortable, or other men uncomfortable for that matter, or anyone uncomfortable, related on discrimination based on gender. And to test this, they did it with just asking people about their names, or to change the name of one individual in the group. So say this name is John, this person, everybody knows this person is John, but then how many people does it take to get everybody to change using the name John to the name Eric, for the sake of argument? And it took 25% of people that were actively going, no, that's not John, his name's Eric, for the whole group to change to using the name John to Eric. So there's quite a big kind of, there's got to be quite a lot of active engagement here. It's no good us all individually becoming mindful of our reactivity. We've actually got to do something positive to change culture. And if we don't get to this critical mass, all investment in culture change is wasted, because it just fizzles away. It goes back to a preceding sort of stable state of the system. We have to build this up to make a curve that is sustainable, to create a biological level of shift from one state to another, a systemic shift from one state to another. We have to build the sort of culture out of the way we relate to each other to create these culture changes. And very pleased that the Dutch Mindfulness-Based Dutch Teachers Association with Bamber asked me to submit the MBOE program. I guess it's now 3 years ago, for to scrutinize it, to look at it, to try and create to recognize a new standard for mindfulness-based programs, because I think everybody's beginning to appreciate that, first of all, you need to create programs that work in different contexts, and specifically the length of mindfulness meditations in therapeutic approaches aren't appropriate for the workplace. So we went through that process, and I'm very pleased that it's been formally recognized as a moderated low dose mindfulness-based program. This is the curriculum, and now we're disseminating the program and beginning to train teachers. I'm going to be involved in discussions with Bamber about how to become recognized as a teacher training, or a practitioner training, as I would like to change the term to a practitioner training organization for a moderated low dose MVP of mindfulness-based organizational education. So that's the state of development of the state of play at the moment. It's an exciting stage. So how do we do this change? What do we do this? This is the workshop bit. Okay. How does it go? So learning about the way we see things. We're not eating a raisin here. We're going to have a look at working out what it is, how we create an image in the mind, what we think about something. And so have a look at this image. Ask yourself, what is it? What do you see? what thoughts come to mind. How do you feel about what you see? And then Sally will give you 30 seconds to look at that and think about that. And then Sally will invite you all to go into breakout rooms, and you can have a conversation about your observations of beg your pardon, of your thoughts and feelings about this image, and your sensations, your thoughts, feelings, and sensory experience of looking at this image. So welcome back, everyone. And this is the first activity of the first class. I'd invite you to read my short essay in the Mindful Initiatives collection, responding to mindfulness, developing agency in urgent times, where I describe this activity. So it'll just give you another little story around it, but it'd be lovely if anybody wanted to share any of their conversations or their thoughts, their feelings, what was going on in that image.
I thought it was a urinal lying on its back.
Yeah.
But it was a strange design I'd not seen before, with two drains. Once my
Right.
brain had gone into that, then it was very difficult to reverse out to make it anything else, I have to say.
Yeah. Thank you. Did anyone else think it was a urinal?
We had a group of 3 girls, and that's the same thing we thought.
Yeah.
So we said, art.
Yeah. Any other responses?
We had a really nice conversation because we knew what it was in terms of art.
Yeah.
And we knew it was Duchamp, and we talked about how the artist was changing the way we think about the world.
Yeah.
And about the subjective nature of life, and how because he labeled it art, this everyday object becomes art.
Yeah.
So we had a really nice conversation about that and reflected on that.
And
how it's relevant to sort of like spirituality as well, and or mindfulness too.
Yeah, well, I at the very least, part of mindfulness is metacognition. So it's asking you to look at your thoughts and see how you're creating them, at the very least, and then look at the sensory elements of that, and that you're putting that together. And that's very much what mindfulness is all about. Anyway, I use that activity at the start of the course to say this is what mindfulness is about, so that we're aware of the way we create our stories and our thoughts, and we can see how they're being triggered by seeing a series of sensory inputs, and we're creating a narrative around that, and it depends on what we've seen before as to what we bring to that narrative. And then I'd ask people that did think it was urinal, I'd ask the gentleman, I'd say, well, would you urinate in it? And I don't think anybody would. And
I
you
would
could say
urinate on most modern art, but yeah, that one in particular.
Yeah, but not that one there. I mean, because there are women, children, other, it's a public space. It's not even plumbed in. It would be a real mess, and it's not the right way up. So if we define things, we normally define things by their function. It's a urinal because it's somewhere that men, something that men use to urinate in, but it's only useful to perform that function if it's in a small building plumbed into the mains and the sewers, and it's only and it's got to be exclusive entry for men only. Then it becomes a urinal. So we have this label that we put on things, and then when they don't quite fit our expectations, we kind of, because the context has changed, we kind of have a response about thinking about it in lots of different ways. So quite often we see something as a thing, and we get upset about it because it's not doing the thing that we think it should do. And that's because the conditions have changed. And mindfulness is a great deal about being able to see when we get trapped in an idea of how things should be, and conditions aren't enabling things to be the way we think they should be, and realizing that we've got to adapt in some way, or we've got to adapt our expectations in some way about that. And mindfulness is giving us the ability to do that by being curious about what's going on in our minds, how we're creating our ideas. So we're starting with, if you like, the most advanced kind of thinking about this, and relating the whole of the rest of the course to those ideas. So it's very much a cognitive approach. And actually, if you actually want to go back to the Buddhist approach, the first step on the Noble Eightfold Path is right view, and this is all about right view. It's not mindfulness at all. Right mindfulness is 7th on the Eightfold Path. So we've got to know why we're doing this. We've got to talk about the context. We've got to talk about the context of why we're doing this and why we need to do this. And I think these are all really important because they define our expectations. They define what we want to get out of something. And they define what we're looking for as we do something. Okay. Go back to the presentation. I don't have enough time to run through this, but then the next step, the next activity is describing what's going on in these images. And we can see that there are different emotions, and everybody kind of comes up with everybody in this activity, well, nearly everybody will come up with exactly the same description of the emotion. We're very good at reading the emotion, but we'll quite often come up with different stories to explain what's going on. So again, we're developing this language that is about describing an emotion, and we're describing a context in which the emotion arises, or the behavior that goes with that emotion arises. And again, that context for that behavior is something that we're interpreting in the image, and we're interpreting that image from our own experience. And what this is actually doing then, and then I'm explicit about this in the course, is now we're learning how to describe an experience. We're learning that different people interpret things differently, but we nearly always interpret the emotion correctly, or in the way that everybody seems to. We commonly interpret emotions we're very good at reading emotions because we're social animals, but because we live in changing times, or changing cultural times, we don't have common assumptions about the way we should go about doing things. We all have all sorts of different sets of interpretations, and that results in conflict. So we need to start learning to describe our experience in order to understand each other. And this is what we're learning to do on this program. And we're learning to do that first with someone that's a kind of a third party, or vicariously, before we start to learn to do that and describe our own experience and what's going on for us, and then describing that to others, and others listening to us. So it's building everything up in a very safe way and explaining very clearly what the intentions and the functions of the program, what is expected, what you're expecting yourself to learn in the process. There are no surprises. So that following on from this theme, this is actually the guided meditation or guided visualization, I would often call it, from week 5, which, if you like, is the most important stage in the program. And it kind of mixes together the approaching the difficult meditation with the structure of the loving kindness or metta meditation, where what we're doing here is we are creating a condition where we can visualize these three different people, but we are using the skills that we have learned, the understanding and the skills, to pay attention to how we create an experience in our own mind out of our imagination from this visualization in this practice. So let's see how we're doing for time. I'd invite you all to join in with this. We'll do this very quickly. And then I think, seeing as we're expecting to finish at 2 o'clock, that's right. We'll just go straight into a plenary session to talk about this and any further questions. So if you can imagine those 3 different people, we'll just do a quick guided visualization, observe what's going on, and then we'll talk about that in a plenary session and any other questions that may come up. I'm going to stop share and lead you in a very short version of this guided practice. So we've got all these 3 people in our minds. Or we can, these 3 people, we can think of these 3 people. So you might want to close your eyes to just imagine those people. And we're starting just by paying attention to sensations of breathing and cutting out whatever else is going on in our minds, interrupting thinking, grounding our awareness in the body. And then bringing to mind someone that we have very good feelings about, someone that's helped us and someone that we only want good things for, perhaps visualizing a situation where we were with them, or we imagine ourselves being with them, and just noticing how we feel about this, and maybe any thoughts that arise and any feelings or emotions that come with those thoughts, just noticing what's going on in our minds when we create this visualization of this experience. Just really going into our internal world, noticing our thoughts, emotions, feelings, accepting them as they are. Sadness may come up, the story about not seeing this person again, or seeing this person again, looking forward to seeing this person again, and what we're going to do, what we might do, what our hopes might be. It could be all sorts of stories in our lives about this person and our feelings. And then taking a slightly deeper breath, just focusing attention on the sensations of breathing, interrupting this visualization, interrupting whatever else is going on in the mind, and focusing attention on sensations of breathing for 2 or 3 breaths. And then bringing to mind someone that we don't really know very well, or we don't know at all, but we can visualize them. Someone serving at the checkout, someone a receptionist, and someone at reception in the office, or a neighbor that we've never spoken to, but just sort of people watching them in our mind, visualizing them, where we've met them, maybe just wondering what's going on in their lives, what their politics are, do they have a family, etc. What are their hopes, what are their challenges in life? So we're being curious about this other person, and we're being curious about the way our minds create a story around this person, and what our feelings are, and what our thoughts are about this person, and maybe about ourselves in relationship to that person. What's going on in our minds? And then taking a few deeper breaths, just focusing attention on sensations of breathing, interrupting whatever else is going on in the mind, interrupting the visualization, interrupting the thoughts, just returning the focus of attention to sensations of breathing. And then the next person we're bringing to mind, or next situation, is a situation where someone has caused us some kind of annoyance or frustration of some kind. And, you know, this always comes with a slight public health warning. You know, don't think about somebody that has really caused you a great deal of harm or hurt. This is about an experiment. The kind of suggestion that I would think of is someone that maybe leaves a dirty cup in the office, in the sink, and expects other people to clean it up, or the kids that drop the litter and it all goes in your garden. You have to pick it up every morning after school. You know, we're creating an experiment to see what the stories are in the mind and how we create those stories. We're not trying to go through some kind of traumatic experience here. So there's a health warning here to not, you know, for the practicality and for well-being. Just think about a very, you know, bringing to mind a situation with a very small frustration more than anything else, or annoyance. So in this situation, is it possible to, first of all, notice feelings arising in the body and the kind of narrative, the stories, the description of this other person and the description of ourselves that arises? And as it arises, noticing how we feel about ourselves creating that story. Do we criticize ourselves? Bringing that curiosity to this whole process. And if possible, us accepting how the mind creates this story and how we think about ourselves and them as natural things, just accepting them as they are, rather than trying to change them. Can we be curious about not just our own stories, our own experience, maybe about what has led this other person to start to behave in ways that have caused us annoyance as well? Being curious about all of the causes and conditions that arise in this experience of conflict. And always remembering that we can always take a step backwards. We can use this capacity to disengage attention on what we're thinking about with the practice of mindfulness, to focus attention on sensations of breathing, to narrow that focus of attention and produce a calming effect in the body by paying attention to how the body is in the present moment, using that skill if we need to. And then we can always step back into the difficult situation, feeling safe with one step and one and being able to control this process of engaging in what is difficult, and then stepping back to being able to control our attention and our experience through disengaging it, through paying attention to sensations of breathing. And so I'm going to draw this activity, this visualization activity to a close, and invite you to spend just focus attention on sensations of breathing for a few breaths, interrupting whatever else has gone on in your mind in the last few minutes. And then, you know, when you feel comfortable, opening your eyes, stretching, yawning, taking a sip of water. And it'd be lovely if you wanted to engage in a kind of conversation and put your cameras on if you're not in your pajamas still. And here we are. I'm afraid I've only left you 10 minutes to talk, but I mean, I haven't discussed this with Sally or Mark, but I'm happy to carry on. But I know a lot of you have got a tight schedule. But fire away. Thoughts, questions,
Mark, just a note of appreciation throughout the session today. One of the things that I admired most about you, and this just showed up in the guidance here, was you're really skilled at not just guiding through the practice itself, but giving a bit of a spotlight on, and here's what we're doing here. Here's what's going on under the sheets. And then a level deeper than that, like, oh, and so noticing how the mind creates that, how are we learning from that? So just a note of deep appreciation for you.
Oh, thanks, Ted, and lovely to meet you at last.
Nice to meet you too.
Thank you. Yeah.
I noticed with the first visualization, there was just a real feeling of warmth, a bit of sadness, and real physical sense of appreciation of this person. And then when we went to the person we didn't know, how quick a story came into my mind about what I imagined their life was. But what was interesting is how I then, because I noticed I was becoming this story. It was a woman who works in Tesco, and I realized I was being quite dismissive of her life, and then realizing that, and I thought, and then just changing my mindset, like, she might be learning to play the violin, just realizing how quick I can change my mindset. And then with the third one, I was visualizing this group of young people that had been jostled by at the weekend, and they were smoking, they had a vape and they were on weed. And again, there's a feeling of tension, a bit of self-righteousness, and going, young people. And then I think you sort of prompted that feeling of just imagining what might be going on, and just that opening up of, and I remember doing it at the time I was there, thinking, because I was focusing on this one lad, and I thought, oh, who knows? We know what else is in his life, and it just really transformed that feeling of otherness. And so just how we can just change that view, but how quickly my assumptions were there.
Lovely thank you. And the function of that socially is so important. If we're trying to work together to deal with problems that we're all collectively facing, we've got to start understanding, we don't need to, letting go of our judgments. It doesn't mean that we don't start to try and solve problems together, but we've first of all got to start to build these sort of a lightheartedness about what's going on in the world around us, with people around us. Otherwise, we're not going to get to a place where we're able to talk about how we solve problems. We're not going to be able to listen to people that have got different ideas.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mark. There's really interesting exercises, and it's been a while since wanting to connect, and seeing what you do, I can see it 100%, and it really opens up that sense of, for me anyway, recognizing my biases, recognizing preference, and what I did was drop a little bit deeper and recognizing, for the second person, for example, I used the kind of, the typical person at a checkout. And then I noticed how different my response was when I changed the person completely and looked at someone in a sort of a bank setting or a more corporate setting. The biases was completely different.
Yeah, that's really nice. Yeah.
And what I could really understand was the data that I was drawing upon, again, is socially rooted.
Yeah.
So whilst I was hopping out of these different perspectives, all of them are coming from a psychosocial awareness and understanding of what shaped me as a person. I think it's brilliant work you're doing. I'm a real big fan and admirer.
Oh, thank you, Dean.
Giving people the vocabulary to explain their lived experience, I think, is potent. And how you started as well with this whole idea of sense of self. the last thing I'll say before I stop is it just reminded me of the work of Lynn Margulis, who did that amazing work on ecosystems and symbiosis.
Yeah.
Lynn Margulis has got that book, Symbiotic Earth.
Right.
How Lynn Margulis rocked the boat and started a new scientific revolution, and it was all about that interconnectedness.
Yeah. Well, this is basically it, understanding existence as a biological system. This is the shift. I mean, it goes with the shift of a fixed sense of self to understanding reality, everything as a biological system. We then reconnect with that in the same way that ancient peoples connected with the landscape and everything living within it. Realize, and this is much more of an, I mean, this is where we're having to conceptualize this as well as learn how to pay attention, to create a narrative around this, as well as learn the skills of paying attention to moment sensory experience. Because until we have a narrative around this, we're not going to change the culture.
Mark, quick question. When you are doing the trainings, do you explain at this depth about the idea of existence as biological systems, or is it more that through the training people tune into it and basically understand it and operate more freely within it? Or do you also kind of explain this wider context? I understand.
Yeah. I explain as much as I can get away with.
Yeah. Cool.
And for me, it's I mean, yeah, from my point of view, in a sense, the mindfulness meditations are just a bit of, and I don't mean to, I don't, I wouldn't say I'm I'm not someone that believes in going on long retreats at all. I've spent many years meditating, and I've spent many years with quite a rigorous meditation routine. Now I'm a little bit more cavalier about it. Half an hour a day, 4 or 5 days a week, probably. But I think there's a point at which really what one is doing is assimilating a new way of seeing and a new way of experiencing, and it's important. It's not the time you spent on your seat. And a new way of seeing and a new way of experiencing is about these three things that the Eightfold Path can be divided up into, and that's conceptual insight. It's the way we relate to people ethically, the environment ethically, our experience, our relationships of ethics, and how we feel about our relationships with others. And then the third section of the Eightfold Path, which includes right mindfulness, is how we are able to stabilize our concentration, our concentrative attention, because we've resolved the conflicts that all of these other things are creating, these residues of trauma that we're experiencing, because we've actually worked out what the problem is. It is a conceptual process as much as it is an attentional discipline process. And understanding how, getting to a place where we have a dialogue between these two modes of attention, the one in the left brain and the one in the right brain. So they create the, from an alchemical marriage between these two forms of attention. It's not all about shifting to one form of attention because one form of attention is wrong. Sorry, that was a bit of a rant. Anyway, there you go.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah. So I'd go as deep as I can get away with, is the simple answer.
Yeah. Because they're the ones that ultimately will change the system, I guess.
Yeah. And Mark. Sorry.
No, I was just waving goodbye to Ted. Ted was off.
Oh, right. Okay, great.
But I think it's a real inspiration to me to just listen to you, sort of break this down into real life, really. That the application of the critical elements of the stuff that we all know, but bring it into real life and just understand that we're all kind of fragile.
Yeah.
We've all got these complex stories and these challenges that we hide behind, often behind a facade. But actually your work sort of starts to break that down a little bit, and we start to understand and share each other's stories as part of your program, and learning from that too. And of course, storytelling is the ancient art of learning. It's just sitting around the fire, and it's re-engaging with that. And you know, treating the symptoms is not solving the problem was a very key point you made earlier on. And of course, it is moving on from that, because whilst we know these more clinical-based deliveries are there really to solve some fairly serious issues in the world, and are very precious, quite sacred in doing that. And there must be left to be done.
I would add that in order to establish an evidence base, you have to create an incredibly simplistic model and test that. Now, that means that it is not reality. It is, and we have to understand that difference. If we're trying to change reality, we've got to use more than a spade. You know, we've got forks, we've got all sorts of tools that we need to use, not just the one tool that we have, you know, described a causal process and tested it.
No, fantastic. Well, I'm sure that as we're starting to come to a conclusion on this, but I think I just want to thank you on behalf of everybody for putting the work in. I think it's probably time for some months' time to have another session to go deeper on something you wanted to cover and didn't have time for, because it is super relevant, particularly in the times that we exist in, to have these conversations. And knowing that you're doing this work that actually has got curriculum approved that can turn into something that people can use. So I'll leave this with really, how can people find more about you? Where can people find you? And I'm sure that you'd like them to engage if they want to.
For sure. Everyone's welcome to contact me. I've recently published a kind of website to try and get this whole thing going called socialmindfulness.net. So and it's in a process of development. I mean, it's trying to do two things. One is appeal to a corporate audience and kind of get the basic ideas across and create a hub for a growing group of collaborators and practitioners. You know, so I guess we've got some wonderful collaborators in Italy. Welcome Antonella, who've started running formal trainings as a sort of Italian social mindfulness organization. And so, you know, the idea in the end is to have a network of different social mindfulness organizations all over the world, or practitioners working together as a group and supporting the collective social mindfulness endeavor.
Brilliant. Well, look, thanks again. For those that are online still that are interested in continuing their journey with the Mindful Workplace community, there is a discount available, and I think Sally can reshare that link. And coming up in the program in the next few months, there's mindfulness in organizations, what's working, what's not. There's fighting to flourishing, and Vidiyama Birch turning up in September, and Radical Candor in October, but many things in the pipeline to come. And of course, if you want to find out more about Bamba, it's bamba.org.uk. And but thank you, thanks for coming, and thanks for immersing yourselves into this. It's a bit different, but I think we need this. We need this. We need someone to push this forward with different language. And Mark, so grateful. So on behalf of us all, thank you so much.
And thank you all. Thank you so much. It's a real wonderful thing to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you.